Well, I begin by thanking the Center for their invitation, and I thank every one of you for coming. And it's nice to talk about this topic always, because it's been important in my life. But particularly when there are people don't feel that they're being pressured to do anything. I have no gain or interest in whether you respond by giving more of your money away, and have no comment on where you might want to give it. So that makes it a little bit freer. So this just implies that the tithe has power, and this presentation is for you. And if you think I'm looking at the person beside you when I say that, I'm going to move my head and say it's for you as well. I don't think, I'm hoping that it has some kind of meaning for everyone. So we're going to put you right away in groups of 3, I believe. And here are the questions, which will be in the chat as well. But how do you react to hearing or seeing the word tithe? What's your immediate reaction? And kind of see if you can answer that question 3 ways. Maybe you can't, but what is your gut reaction? What is your intellectual response? And what is your emotional or relational response? So heart, mind, and gut are words that I use. And again, how are you reacting just to the fact that you're chosen to be here and shown up? And which of those do you trust?
So you are all invited to choose one word out of the conversation that you just had in your small group and post that in the chat box. One word. We've got time. Ah is the one word. Ah in capital letters is the one word. Time again. Foreign. Absent conversation. Robert, I see you using 2 words. Uncomfortable. Privileged. Foreign. Resources. Different way. Gift. Wrestle. Normal. Support. Discipline. Oh, these are excellent words. Okay, I think that's it, Glenn.
Okay, so I want to begin about the power, and that is it sets us free. And years ago, a secular Jew suggested I tithed because even though he was secular, he said it just set him free from money controlling him if he took his first 10%, which is an important part of tithing that people sort of miss, that it isn't finding 10%, it's the first 10% of the harvest. And if we're less concerned about money, then I believe we're set free to celebrate God's presence, to live with respect in creation, to love and serve others, to seek justice and resist evil, to proclaim Jesus crucified and risen, our judge and our hope. So just for my Quaker friends here, those words are taken from a contemporary creed of the United Church of Canada. And I told a joke in my small group, how many tithing doctors does it take to support a church? And the answer is not very many. And another one I heard is, how many Johnny Cashes does it take to support a church of any size? And it was 1 if he's tithing. So while I could talk about a community that would covenant to tithe together and the impact and the freedom from having to do any other fundraising, is that's another day. I'm focusing on the limit, the impact on the person doing it. I just provide this quote from Genesis. I'll move on from that, but it's there, and where we hear about it. And so my story is going to, I moved from Cape Breton, way on the right side, to Hazelton up north in the left in 1991, and I had been, the habit in in Cape Breton was to publish everybody's givings in the annual report. And some people said that was in bad taste, and people said, they would argue back, nobody would give anything if they didn't have to be accountable for it at the end of the year. So I went from being one of the biggest givers, and I knew it because it was published, to clearly, just by looking at the number of people in the church and how much money we raised, to being the smaller. And it felt different to go from making that change. So Jan Francis might be laughing right now because that is not Jan and neither Joe, but that's who I use. So Joe and Jan worked at the hospital that was owned and run by the United Church. Jan was a nurse and Joe was the comptroller. And they tithed, and that came up in conversation. So I'm guessing even back in the 90s, they were probably making about $100,000 or more. And I'm pretty sure they were giving about 11,000 to the church. But not only that, they tithed their food. 1 out of 10 meals that Jan cooked was served to guests. And needless to say, I have fond memories of being that lucky person on many occasions. They tithed their garden, and Jan, can you just pop on and tell people how much garlic you grow every year?
Enough garlic I need to use for the year. That's a lot.
Okay, whatever. It's also been left out for gleaners, which is pretty neat. And then their time, between the church and so many organizations. And just, I'd never really heard people tithing, really. I know time was put in the chat, which is neat, but to be tithing your meals and tithing your garden and and this just became known to me. It's not like Jan would introduce herself and be the first thing you'd know about her. And this is not Charlotte Sampere, but I think it looks a bit like Charlotte, the late Charlotte Sampere. And she was in Gitsigukla, member of the Gitsan First Nation. And she would put an envelope in the tray, and I couldn't help but see it, that she would write the amount of $129.30 every week. And I just thought, well, that's an interesting thing. And then it occurred to me clearly, she was making $129.30 every week, she was a teacher on the reserve. And so that was 10% of her paycheck that we got. Whatever, the idea is, that's what made me realize what was going on. And it was, and then when she went on unemployment, got less money, and yet it became $78.30. And for her, we talked about lots of things over my time there. We worked hand in hand, and she's another one of the people who just made the point that it's your first 10%, because then you're truly trusting and offering it, as we often pray in the offerings, as it's a sign of trust that people continue to provide. And so there was $6,000 of offerings in the financial statement, and at $129 every 2 weeks, she was a pretty significant. If you took her out, then you'd see the church would be really struggling even to pay its heating bills. So that's what I found about her. And I thought, well, I'm so inspired by Jan and Charlotte and others that I thought, I wish I could be like them. And I had good reasons for why I couldn't. But I thought, I don't know, looks good. They seem to be happy. But I thought, I just can't afford it. And I need a lot more money to do it. And so I kind of entered into what I'd say a prayerful discussion with God, saying, I seem to be getting the message that tithing should be part of my life, or it could be, and it's not my experience. So what do I do? And so I sort of explained to God in prayer why I couldn't tithe. And I said that I had been being paid 5% above minimum where I had moved from in Cape Breton to minimum because it was an aid receiving charge. And so I took a pay cut of 5% or $1,600 to go across the country. My wife had developed a great clientele as a freelance writer and did that in addition to some other projects and caring for our child at that point. So when we moved due to settlement, transfer and settlement, her income dropped $10,000. So I added that. I said, God, you gotta account for that. And then I had a student loan and I was trying to pay it off. It was on a ridiculously high rate. So I was paying that off. And I thought, if I was supporting a different student as a benefactor, this would be part of my tithe. So I sort of decided that that should be counted. And for Christmas every year, I said to my parents, just write a check to the church. You don't have to give me a gift because I can't give the way I want. And they would send $1,500. So that was in lieu of tithe. That's what I paddled up. So got out the adding machine and asked God to look over my shoulder. And I said, here it is, 1,600 from the drop, 10,000 from the drop in income, the loan of my folks. So that totaled up to $19,300 that I felt I was giving by having moved there. And I consistently worked about 48 hours a week. And of course, we are supposed to be working 40. And so I added another $6,400 because I was tithing my time. So now my total is up to $27,200 a year that I figure I should be given credit for. So my checks were $1,900 a month, and 10% is pretty easy. So I was saying, well, that's $190. Let's see if I can do that. But then I realized that I can't speak for my wife. If she wants to tithe, that's her business. So I cut that in half, saying I can only speak for half this income. So it came down to what I thought a reasonable tithe was $1,140 for the year. And so that's what I owed, but I was already paying the equivalent, as I tried to tally up earlier, of $27,000. So I said, okay, God, you owe me $26,000 per year. Pay me that and I'll start tithing. And I said, how about we make a deal? You'll leave me alone. You won't give me these little people come into my lives that remind me that tithing is everything. And you leave me alone and I'll keep on doing what I'm doing. And then Gordon Picorni, and those who know Gordon know that's not him, but I used this picture. He was the equivalent. He was the presbytery employee, so kind of like a bishop, but more just like a funny old friend of mine. And he just said to me, and I don't know what the context was, but he just said, tithing is part of the Christian experience. And it just sat heavy. He says, those who aren't doing it are missing something. And it wasn't any bit of irony. It was just beautifully put. And of course, he's the other one who always said, if people say, do you mean before taxes or not taxes? Then he'd say, if you're asking the question, you're not ready to tithe, which I always thought was a good answer. And so God didn't leave me alone, and through Gordon, he said, you can't put this away in a box. I went traveling to Seattle and went to Mount Zion Baptist. I always attend African-American church if I can. And their tithing, their offering took about 15 minutes. And if you tithe, first of all, they collected the tithes. And a bunch of people in white tuxedos came and collected the tithes. And people danced up while this great gospel singing was happening, and put the money in these beautiful buckets and were thanked. And then afterwards, they had the offerings, which there was much less fanfare. And it was just so outrageous from, our fear of doing this. And boy, the words "God loves a joyful giver," I'd never ever seen it quite so profound. And then of course some of the people who had tithe went back up, because it's tithes and offerings. And it's interesting, we tend to think of tithes or offerings, not and. And so that was, again, when I'm trying to say, God, don't talk to me about this, I got bugged some more. And then I realized that tithing is for everybody. And it's not a gift for God. The ability to do it is a gift from God. So over the next few years, God responded. And first thing, God reminded me that I had accepted transfer and settlement. So I had some attitude to think that I should be given credit for that. I could have said no. And my 5% income loss was increased by a couple little extra things that came along. And of course, and so that was gone. And before long, my wife found work in the community that paid well, and she was back to her 10,000. I paid off my student loan, and then I said, it's if I'm going to work more than 40 hours, that's my choice. I don't have anyone looking over my shoulder saying, we expect you to do any more. And then this really odd thing, God's accountant said, Glenn, I noticed you have $1,500 down on your account you gave us, but saying it's from your dad, but your dad submitted the same receipt. So you're both trying to get credit for this. Which one should we give it to? And so I realized that it was that was inappropriate to be taking credit for something that really was my father's generosity. So all those numbers that added up to 27,000 disappeared in 18 months. And so I was kind of back to square one, thinking, okay, I'm getting these messages about tithing, and I had reasons, and they're gone. And so the new calculation was simple. One size fits all. I was making 20,000 a year, and that's 2,000. I had a beautiful manse that I lived in, and that wasn't cash. And I said, I'm going to sort that one out a little bit later on. I'll stick with my paycheck. And it was interesting. So my wife and I came to this decision in March. And then after doing it, I felt good and I was ready, and I had the concept of the first. And then I said, so does this start today, or does it start 3 months ago? Is this the 2002 decision? And I decided to think and pray. And a few days later, I got a phone call, a friend asking for what was owing, if you will, was $600. And a friend wanted the exact same amount. He was going down to Vancouver to take a course in addiction counseling, and he needed his rent damage deposit, and asked if he could borrow it. And I thought, wasn't that funny? It's the same amount. So I gave him the $600 right there and then. And they went down, and I just thought, there's a phrase in the African-American church about God, that's used elsewhere, but God showing off. And I sort of felt that's what God was doing. I'm going to provide opportunity for you, and here's how I'll do it with flair. So that is 21 years ago, and we've been joyful givers ever since. And I guess the expression "give till it hurts" I find really troubling, because it doesn't fit with a loving God. And I've met many people who use that kind of phrase, but people who tithe the first 10, like I just simply never met an unhappy tither. I've never met someone, well, I tithe, but boy, it's hard. I hate it. I just never heard those words. So what we do now is each year, we look at what our income would be in retirement. That's fairly predictable. Divide by 10 and set out what to support. And then we have a bit of a pool so we can handle things when they come. And it's just habit now, and thankful for it and find joy in it. As I've said already, if there's an unhappy tither in the world, I just never met them. And so if at all this story of mine is intriguing you, I offer the shoebox challenge, and that is to take your first 10% every month, put it in a shoebox, and maybe do that starting in July, so that after 6 months you can say, oh, I can make a year-end donation. Or you can say, I can't really afford this, but boy, I've got my money saved up for giving gifts at the end of the year. So, or for whatever needs you have. And then you just find out what it's like. I think, and I just, over the years, because I haven't been afraid to talk about the concept, again, not coercing, not just open to when it comes up. The answers are, I don't make enough money. Church isn't that important to me. Other people who can afford to should give more. I can't do it. I've got young children. I can't do it. I've got too much debt. I can't do it. I need to save for retirement. I can't do it. I'm living on a fixed income. Tithing was easier in the Bible because they didn't pay taxes. As it came up in our little group at the beginning, tithing isn't a United Church thing, or tithing isn't a Quaker thing, or tithing isn't, there are churches where it's very much. And I give a lot of money to a lot of places. Again, in my mind, missing that sense of it being an act of trust. You can be really generous and not be related. So again, this is just a verse that you can come back to later if you wish, in which it just describes tithing as part of the landscape, as opposed to any great big demand. Another one, which is fairly strong wording, and certainly if you went to some churches, you would this would be used to pressure people into the tithe. Don't want to pursue it, and I'll just read it. Church is free. You'll never be handed an invoice by your church, but mission has a cost, and sometimes it can be paid with money. Very involved in the co-op where I live, and one of the people I've done a lot of work with once says, if you've got a problem and the problem can be solved with money, and you've got money, there's no problem. And sometimes that solves problems immediately, and other times you say, well, I don't have the money. And again, I would say the United Church has not done itself a favor by being so scared to talk about something that's biblical and part of the Christian experience. And I think God's desire that we would be happy about what we give. And we're just so scared of coming across in a way that offends someone. And I love to point out that Jesus tithed his words. 10% of what he wrote was about money. And I always, if I get into the discussions with people, will say, and compared to homosexuality, where he 0% that he talked about. So, and we always have to hear anything Jesus said. Not sure if his talking about money is what got him crucified, but it probably contributed to it. And, it's not complicated. So I just thought I'd share what this looks like, and hopefully the link will work. Okay, so at the beginning of the year, we set out that we make $4,200 a month, and that worked out. I'm looking at the bottom. I don't know if you see the pointer, but so 5,000, and then we projected. We do a scholarship. We support our monthly Quaker meeting, and then the others are all places I've had a relationship with, been on their board in the past, or Alex has, or that we have a connection. And so that took us $10 over. And then we had a whole bunch that that we just were able to say yes to. And so there's our total. It ended up being 6,000. And so I set up that spreadsheet, and as we do things during the year, and it's just something that that I enjoy, the cheerful giving. So that basically is simply my story of how it began. And as I say, the people of Hazelton were very, very much of that part of that inspiration, and as was that 2 years of negotiating with God. So how do you react to the assertion that my friend Gordon said that tithing is part of the Christian experience? And do you agree that it's God's desire for you to be able to tithe and more?